Now, turning to you first, Oscar, there's this very interesting story about Nigel Farage, obviously newly elected MP for the Reform Party, claiming that he can't carry out constituency surgeries in Clacton because of, essentially, threats of violence.
I completely believe it. I think there is a really unhealthy... It's been met with a real unhealthy kind of scepticism because, Farage, he wants to swan off here, there and everywhere. Maybe he's using it as an excuse. But, you have to remember, over the last few years, we've had 2 MPs lose their lives. You have to remember that Farage himself has had... And I know... people who are not politically aligned to Farage, that's kind of took a bit of joy in it, I think, like with the milkshake,
yes,
it's only a milkshake, or I think people were lobbing cement at him from the top of his campaign bus. He's had, really kind of hairy moments. So I can completely believe it. It's very, very sad. It inhibits democracy. Me and Theo were talking in the green room. However, he will have to find a proper way to engage with his constituents. He's a whatever you think of Nigel Farage, whatever part of the political spectrum you are, he's an incredible communicator. He's a very creative thinker, actually, as a campaigner and as a politician. And he's going to have to find a way in order to get around this completely understandable fear to engage with the people who ultimately elected him.
And Theo, really, the basic foundation of our democracy is that politicians are safe, isn't it? I mean, is a Zoom surgery just as good? Well,
it could be a Zoom surgery. I don't know whether there are other precautions that could be introduced, ways for Nigel Farage to engage with his constituents, as Oscar said. But I think one of the foundations of there's 2 foundations. One's that our politicians are safe, but also that we have a constituency-based system, and so that one way the public can get help, whether it's on anything from a row with their council to GP services or whatever it is they can go to their local MP who represents them, and they can raise the issue at the highest echelons of government if necessary, or just help out by writing a letter to the council or said GP surgery. That's how it works. And I think Nigel Farage has to, the longer he leaves it, spending time outside of his constituency, not working the patch, the harder it is going to be for him to get back in and start engaging with his constituents. And I'd also say there is real merit. There's something to be gained from being a strong local MP, because often if an MP stands up in the House of Commons and says, well, I say this and I say that it could be just sort of swept aside by the Minister or the Prime Minister if it's at PMQs. If you say, my constituent has suffered this, my constituent wrote to me and said this, that's a much more powerful argument and can't just be swatted away. And there are MPs who have made, headlines, and they've made a name for themselves just by being very good at their job of being an MP. And Nigel Farage just needs to think, as Oscar said, think very creatively, whether it's Zoom or whether it's, putting in, even more security measures, whether it's, wanding people coming into his surgery or however it might be, or unannounced walkabouts. However, he needs to find a way of doing something to get into Clacton and start working the patch a bit harder.
What do you make of this, Miriam?
Well, I absolutely, like Oscar, think it's totally believable. And sadly, MPs receive death threats all the time, even MPs who aren't anywhere near as prominent as Nigel Farage. But I also agree that being seen and being around and about is a very important tenet of our democracy. But I think people forget about MP staff. So, yes, Farage is obviously at risk, but if he were to do a surgery and he were to be attacked, it's not just him that's in danger. His staff would also be too. So I think it's absolutely right for MPs to take decisions based on the safety of their staff and not just themselves. But it is sad, but unfortunately, all through history, very prominent leaders do face these security threats, and I think we're right to take them seriously.
Oh, yeah, we undoubtedly have to take them seriously.
Yeah. And now we're joined by the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, who joins us live from the Reform UK Party Conference in Birmingham. Good morning, Richard. What's the atmosphere like?
Well, good morning. The sky is a little bit gloomy, I have to say. Not much sign of an Indian summer, but it is bright and cheery inside the conference venue. It is going to be absolutely seismic, our biggest ever conference over 2 days, well over 3,000 delegates. It's going to be some amazing speeches. We're going to be celebrating our incredible achievement, 4.1 million votes, 5 MPs at the general election that everybody said we couldn't get any MPs. But we're also going to be tackling Starmageddon on steroids. I mean, I launched this word back in January. Little did I realise how horrific it would be after just 12 weeks. We're going to be talking about the failures of their immigration policy, the absolute catastrophe of the cult of net zero. That's what I'm going to be focusing on in my speech, and much, much more. Loads to look forward to.
Can I ask you about Nigel Farage, who has explained why he's not holding the physical in-person surgeries in Clacton-on-Sea? He worries about a knife attack at those surgeries. We've been hearing this morning that the Speaker's office has no record of telling Nigel Farage not to hold in-person surgeries. So can you explain why he's made that choice not to do so?
Yeah, look, the Parliamentary Security Authorities actually have been first class, but at the end of the day, it's up to the individual MP to make their own judgment about their personal safety, taking into account the advice that one receives. And sadly, we saw just within the first 10 days of Nigel's campaigning in the general election, 2 attacks on him, and, that has to be taken very, very seriously. So, that's why Nigel's making those important decisions. But, no one's got more visibility, frankly, than Nigel on social media, his presence. I'm getting millions of views on mine, the other 3 MPs likewise. So we're out there, we're making a noise. Frankly, we are the real opposition. The Tories have vacated the premises, hardly ever see them in the House of Commons. I've spoken 16 times. I've challenged the zealot-in-chief, Ed Miliband. I've challenged the Home Secretary. I've challenged the Health Secretary on the failings of the NHS. So look, we're holding them to account. That's what people expect of opposition parties.
But it's a really important pillar of our democracy, isn't it, that our MPs, our constitutional MPs, engage with constituents. So Nigel Farage is going to have to think creatively, isn't he, about how he can meet his constituents face to face, or at least have that personal relationship with them, because he's been criticised, hasn't he, for not spending enough time in his constituency.
Oh, listen. The time to worry is when people are not criticising Nigel. I mean, that's the time to worry, as opposed to when they are criticising him. Listen, the truth is that, we're all talking to our constituents. I get hundreds of emails every day, every week. We're responding to those. I know Nigel's team is doing likewise. Where we can help constituents with issues, with challenges, obviously that's what we try and do. I was chuckled when someone wondered if I could help them with the woodwork and the carpentry in their home. I said, if I helped you doing that, then frankly, that would be a disaster. So look, we try and help where we can, but we can't do everything.
Now, Richard, you've said that your reform is trying to set yourselves up as the main opposition, and obviously we've had these changes in how the party works. You're obviously trying to grow your candidate base. But there was a lot of criticism at the general election about the selection of some of those candidates, perhaps unsavoury views, perhaps even illegal activity that they'd taken part in the past. How are you going to improve your vetting processes so that doesn't happen again, and so that you can build this kind of credible party?
So did you ask the same question of the Green Party, who also stood over 600 candidates?
I certainly
and
will,
who had
but I
many
haven't got
more
them on the
people
line
who
at the
they had to
moment.
withdraw the whip? Excellent. Well, please do. No, well, that's fine. Well, listen, the point is, when you've got a big entity, a big organisation, you always get the odd person who says or does something daft. You deal with it promptly and rapidly. And of course, we're a fast-growing political start-up. We're making great strides. We're professionalising. We're democratising. We're getting ready for the May county elections, the mayoral elections. And I think we're making huge strides. And here's the point. Even since the election, guess what? We're going up in the polls in Scotland because people see this common sense of our policy against net zero, the common sense of using our energy treasure. We're going up in the polls in Wales. We're equally or ahead of the disappearing Conservatives. So look, we're making progress. We came second to Labour in, I think, 90 seats. Trust the British people, trust the voters. That's what I say. That's who we're targeting, not the mainstream media and establishment, who frankly are just trying to smear and label because they're terrified about the progress we're making. And here's the thing. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable. It takes courage to talk about the uncomfortable issues, and sometimes, yes, the truth hurts.
Can I ask you about the comments of Tory leadership hopeful Robert Jenrick talking today about English identity? He says it's under threat. The ties which bind the nation together are beginning to fray, he says, as a result of an influx of migrants and the sneering attitude of the metropolitan elite towards English identity. And some of our viewers emailing in this morning making the point that it sounds straight out of the Reform voters' contract. Are you threatened by Robert Jenrick? Are you threatened by his rhetoric?
No, listen, when people try and copy us, I'm flattered, not threatened. Look, the reality is that Robert Jenrick is terrified by the progress that Reform are making. In the same way that Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, he copied some of our healthcare policy about using more independent healthcare. So, look, if people want to copy us, that's great. It shows that actually we've got the right policies, the common sense policies. For example, on my economic policy about the Bank of England stupidly paying voluntary interest on all the printed money, I've now got the Financial Times, I've got the Sunday Times, I've even got Robert Peston agreeing with me that Tice is right. So that's why we're talking common sense. We've got the right economic policies, we've got the right migration policies, and we're telling it as it is on net zero. That is why we're going up in the polls.
Richard, sticking with economics for a moment, the breaking news this morning is that public debt has hit 100% of GDP, clearly a very negative milestone. Rachel Reeves is absolutely right, isn't she, to stick to her guns and to means test the winter fuel payment and perhaps even raise taxes?
No, she's completely wrong. She's utterly clueless. She won't do what needs to be done. She won't tell the Bank of England not to pay 30 billion of voluntary reserves. They won't scrap net zero that would save 30 billion approximately every single year. That's how you create some growth. That's how you stop raising debt. That's what we've got to do. And look, the winter fuel allowance is an absolute scandal. I've got over 22,200 pensioners losing that winter fuel allowance. Furious. I had a pensioner in Boston just 2 weeks ago literally shake my hand and burst into tears of fear as to whether or not she would see the end of winter because she was worried about being so cold. No, I think this Labour government have got no idea how to create growth, no idea actually how to protect pensioners. They seem to view pensioners as sort of people that they can dismiss, and rather they just want to sort of boost the salaries of already well-paid train drivers and other unionised public sector workers who, frankly, yes, look, everybody wants a pay rise, but guess what? In the world of business, it comes with a requirement for performance-related productivity improvements. None of that from the Labour Party.
Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, thank you very much indeed.